where we talk about the climate and special topics pertaining to the Southeast region. I am Sandra Rain, the regional climatologist from the Southeast Regional Climate Center, and I will be giving a climate overview for the month of October, as well as a tropical update. Unfortunately, Jeff and Todd are busy this week, so they will not be giving a river forecast update. I will do my best to give a brief one. We are fortunate today to have a few guest speakers, Pam Knox from the University of Georgia, who will give an agricultural update, and Mike Halpert from the Climate Prediction Center, who will provide a winter outlook. We thank them for joining us. Just a reminder before we begin, to type all of your questions in the question box at any time, and they will be answered at the end. Please fill out the survey to help us with future webinars. And a recap email with a link to this recording will be sent out within the next day or two. All right, let's begin with October. Temperatures were above average across much of the Southeast region for the month of October. Monthly mean temperatures were at least 3 degrees above average for over 60% of our long-term reporting stations. There were 4 stations that observed their warmest October on record, and that includes Tampa, Florida, and Clayton, North Carolina. Now, due to the presence of clouds and tropical moisture during the month, nighttime cooling was suppressed, resulting in above average minimum temperatures. A few stations in Florida saw average minimum temperatures above 75 degrees, including West Palm Beach, Florida, and Miami, Florida. Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands had slightly above average temperatures for October, with some places reporting about 1 to 2 degrees above average. Coloso, Puerto Rico observed its 7th warmest October on record, and Aybonito, Puerto Rico tied for its 10th warmest. Precipitation was variable across the Southeast region during October, which was highly dependent on the tracks of the remnants of tropical systems. The driest locations were found across eastern Georgia and South Carolina and eastern North Carolina, whereas the wettest locations were located across northern Georgia, western North Carolina, and southeastern Florida. One of the dry reporting stations was Laurinburg, North Carolina, which only observed 0.43 inches of rain, ranking this the 4th driest October on record. In contrast, however, Gainesville, Georgia received 10.76 inches of rainfall, ranking this its wettest October on record. Most of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands received about normal amounts of precipitation for the month, with it being drier in the eastern and western parts of the region and slightly wetter in the central areas. Roosevelt Roads, Puerto Rico only received 2.03 inches of rain, tying for its 4th driest October on record. All right, on to the tropical update. As you can see, it's been a very active season, and this shows all of the storm tracks, not including Eta. So some of the statistics include that the Atlantic has seen 28 named storms so far. Actually, that would be 29 since we have Theta out there, which is about 246% of average. 12 of these storms were hurricanes, and 5 of those hurricanes were major hurricanes, meaning they've reached Category 3 strength or higher. Now, the official end to the Atlantic hurricane season is November 30th. But when you look at the graph to the right, you'll notice that we can still see some storms after the season ends. There were 3 named storms in October, starting with Hurricane Delta, which made landfall near Creole, Louisiana on October 9th as a Category 2 hurricane with winds of 100 miles per hour. As it moved northeastward and weakened, the remnants of Delta brought heavy rain and 13 confirmed tornadoes across the southeast region. On October 10th, Atlanta, Georgia received 4.55 inches of rain from the storm in a single day, making it the second wettest October day on record. Also on October 10th, an EF1 tornado with winds of 90 miles an hour came through Newton County, Georgia, damaging the roof of a homeless shelter and causing 2 injuries. Hurricane Epsilon was the 10th hurricane of the season, reaching Category 3 strength with maximum sustained winds of 115 miles per hour. It tracked east of Bermuda and generated high surf along the U.S. East Coast. Hurricane Zeta made landfall near Cocodrie, Louisiana as a Category 2 hurricane with winds of about 110 miles per hour. A wind gust of 91 miles per hour was reported in Mobile, Alabama. However, it quickly moved northeastward, prompting for rare tropical storm warnings for parts of the North Carolina and Virginia mountains, where winds gusted over 50 miles per hour. Hickory, North Carolina, reported a wind gust of 55 miles per hour. Widespread power outages were reported, as well as numerous reports of downed trees. Unfortunately, there were 8 fatalities from Hurricane Zeta, including one in Ackworth, Georgia, where a large oak tree was uprooted and fell on a mobile home, killing a man. Our most recent hurricane made landfall Eta made landfall on November 3rd in Nicaragua as a Category 4 hurricane with winds of 140 miles per hour, causing cataclysmic flooding and life-threatening storm surge. Eta then moved northeastward as it weakened, making landfall as a tropical storm on the south-central coast of Cuba. Then it tracked northwestward to make landfall in the Florida Keys late Sunday night. Bands of heavy rain brought flooding to southern Florida and Fort Lauderdale, the Florida Keys, as well as tropical storm force winds. Eta has now tracked westward into the Gulf of Mexico and is expected to make landfall again by the end of the week. The season is not over yet. Since 1950, 24 tropical storms have developed in the Atlantic Basin from November 19th through New Year's Eve. That's an average of 1 storm every 3 years. The most recent was Olga in mid-December in 2007. In 2005, 3 named storms formed after November 18th. So the most recent outlook shows Eta in the Gulf. We now have subtropical storm Theta with winds of 50 miles per hour, and this is the 29th named storm of the season, making 2020 the most active Atlantic hurricane season on record. And it's not over yet. We still see another area down in the Caribbean. As far as the ENSO update, we are under a La Niña advisory, with the next update due out by November 12th, so this Thursday. But I will let Mike go into more details on what that means for winter in the Southeast. The current drought monitor shows a very dry western United States and drought conditions in the Northeast. However, here in the Southeast, we remain drought-free for the month of October. Currently, there are pockets of abnormally dry conditions over eastern Georgia and South Carolina, as well as Puerto Rico. The outlook over the next few months is drought development appears to be likely over southern Georgia and northern Florida by January. As far as the 3-month outlook for the Climate Prediction Center, there's about a 33 to 40% chance of seeing above average temperatures for November, December, and January, and a 30 to 50% chance of below average precipitation for the Southeast region. For the next 6 to 10 days, we'll notice that there will be a slight warm up over the southeast region, according to the Climate Prediction Center. And the rainfall you can see in Florida will start getting more rainfall. When it comes to the river forecast, the current river conditions show about minor flooding in some areas, with a forecast of minor flooding over the next couple of days. The 7 to 10 day precipitation forecast shows we could see maybe up to 5 inches in part of the southeast. So as the frontal system comes through, we'll see more rain develop, and it'll depend on what Eta does as well. However, the river flood outlook does not show any significant river flooding to be expected. So to sum up, October temperatures were above average with above average minimum temperatures. October precipitation was variable for the southeast and above average for western North Carolina, but below average for eastern Georgia and South Carolina. The Caribbean had slightly above average temperatures for October and about average precipitation. The storms included hurricanes Delta, Zeta, and Eta, with 13 confirmed tornadoes from Hurricane Delta, tropical storm warnings in the North Carolina and Virginia mountains from Zeta, and 8 fatalities from Hurricane Zeta. As far as the tropical update, the season officially ends November 30th, but it could still be active after that. We have a La Niña advisory with the next update due out November 12th. No drought for the southeast and Puerto Rico in October, only a few pockets of abnormally dry conditions. Well, this week is warm with a mix of wet and dry conditions, but we should see precipitation chances increase as we go on with the week across the southeast. And autumn into winter will continue to be warm, with the southeast likely to be dry and possible drought development in southern Georgia and northern Florida. So now I will throw it over to Pam Knox to give our agricultural impacts update.
Well, good morning, everybody from Athens, Georgia. I just have a few slides here to talk about. And Sandra's done a really good job of introducing the current conditions, and so I don't need to spend a lot of time on that. As she noted, the last month has been warmer than normal, especially nighttime temperatures, and the rainfall has been very variable, just depending on whether or not you're in an area that's been affected by one of the tropical storms or not. And so you can see the wet spots here showing the rainfall from Hurricane Zeta running through North Georgia, and then that streak up to the northeast, and then the rainfall in South Florida, which has just been inundated. They're going to have one of their wettest years on record. I haven't heard any real impacts from all that rain yet, but you got to believe that the agriculture down there is, the plants are sitting with their feet in water. They're probably not doing very well at all. So let's go on to the next slide. Just a couple different looks at the drought conditions. This is on the left a drought tendency forecast, and you can see there that dry area in east central Georgia, which corresponds with the drought monitors dry area. It's a place that we're really watching. They've been consistently missed this year by all those tropical storms, and so they're pretty dry. Some of the farmers there are having trouble getting their winter forage started, and so they're having some issues, I think, with the onions as well in that part of the state. That's the part that the Vidalia onions come from. You can see the lawn and garden moisture index on the right-hand side there from University of Alabama at Huntsville. Again, shows those really dry conditions in east central Georgia and on into South Carolina. There's also a dry area in Florida that again has been missed by a lot of that tropical storm. But hopefully some of that will be relieved in the next go round of storms. Some of the recent impacts of those conditions on agriculture: cotton is near the end of harvest, but Hurricane Zeta did cause quite a bit of problems down in southern Alabama. A lot of the cotton was still sitting in the fields and blew away. Some farmers lost most of their crop from the winds and that. Peanuts and pecans are also underway, and the farmers have been complaining because they don't have enough dry days. You know, they'll get a couple dry days and we'll get more rain, and it's really hard to do a lot of harvesting if you don't have that long, consistent period of dry weather. And so they're behind schedule. A lot of the peanut and cotton farmers have only about 50% of where they usually are this time of year. At the same time, other farmers are busy planting fall strawberries and fall vegetables, and that has been ongoing. Some places they're just about done with that. Livestock producers are trying to plant their winter forage, and you know, if there's enough moisture, they're not having any issues, but in the drier areas, it's still a problem. And then small grains and onions, some of the other typical winter crops are also being planted at this point. Let's go on. Here's the impacts of Zeta on agriculture. Zeta actually caused me to lose power for 7 hours up here in Athens. We had a lot of tree damage. The wet ground, of course, did not help with that, because when the ground is really wet, the wind really has a little bit more oomph as far as tipping trees over. And so we had a lot of problems with tree fall. And a lot of problems with power outages. In some cases, people were without power for several days. Wet conditions have slowed the cotton harvest, and of course the winds from Zeta did not help with that in southern Alabama. The peanut harvest is also behind the 5-year average, and so all those things are impacted by Zeta. I don't have any impacts yet from Eta. I'm sure there's going to be some, but as it's wandering around, we'll just have to wait. You'll have to come back next month to find out about that. Let's go on. Some of the threats to agriculture that we're looking at in the coming weeks, as we continue to have these wet conditions, it's going to slow down both the end of harvest and also winter planting. You just can't get into the fields when it's this wet. Late pecans could be threatened by more tropical winds blowing them off, where they're not really able to be harvested well. And the rains are continuing to cause a lot of fungal issues with peanuts, with cottonseed sprouting, and we're having a lot of problems with white flies. It's been a real problem this year. And the white flies, not only do they cause problems on the leaves, but they also transmit diseases like tobacco spotted wilt virus and so on. And so those things are also a problem, something we're going to have to think about for this over winter as well. The cloudy conditions that are associated with the rain also have been slowing the harvest. The fields are pretty wet in the morning with dew, and it takes a while for that to dry off before they can get out and work in those. And of course, we're not done with the tropics yet, as Sandra already mentioned. So here's my summary of the ag impacts this month. The continued wet and cloudy conditions have been slowing the harvest quite a bit. Hurricane Zeta has brought wind and rain to the southeast, resulting in some crop losses, tree damage, and a lot of power outages, which of course is a problem for livestock producers. It could cause additional impacts. We'll talk about that next month. Of course, there's still the lingering potential for more tropical storm damage with the next storm, which would probably be called Iota if it forms. And then also keeping in mind that La Niña gives us more likely than not warmer and drier weather than usual, which means that there's going to be an increased overwintering of pests like whiteflies, which could be a problem for next year going into the growing season. And also the dry conditions could make us more likely to go into an abnormally dry or even drought as we enter the next growing season. So those are things we're going to be watching for the next few months. And that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I will be talking about the winter forecast, but before we get to that, we'll look at some of the factors that we look at when we issue our outlooks. We'll start with La Nina. When we have either El Nino or La Nina heading into winter, that becomes the dominant climate factor. As Sandra mentioned, currently La Nina is present. It developed during August. It's very likely to continue through the winter and into the spring. We will be updating that forecast in a couple of days. If folks are interested in learning more about El Nino or La Nina, I've got a couple of links on the slide. There's a very informative ENSO blog that we've been running now for 5 or 6 years. Probably gives you more information than you could ever hope to learn about El Nino and actually other topics as well. Next slide. So, you know, what is El Nino or La Niña? So it really refers in its simplest sense to ocean temperatures across the tropical Pacific Ocean. So here we're looking at a map of ocean temperature departures from normal. From the on the right side of the slide is the west coast of South America. Australia is in the lower left of it. But really the important part for what we expect this winter are all those blue shades, blue colors across the equatorial Pacific. There's a red box that's literally centered right where it's coldest right now. That red box is the area that we call Nino 3.4. It just refers to that area between 120 and 170 west. That's the area that seems to teleconnect or relate best to impacts outside of the tropics. So that's the area we focus on. If we go to the next slide, we can see kind of the history of what the temperature in that box has looked like over the past year. There's different areas that we look at, but again, we're talking about Nino 3.4. So that's the second time series down on the right-hand side of the plot. You can see that the current value, and this was as of last week, is minus 1.5, which is kind of teetering on the threshold between a moderate and a stronger event. You can see it's been a fairly steady decrease in departures starting back in July, after the first half of the year was on the warmer side. Folks might remember last winter we actually flirted with El Nino for a good chunk of it. But El Nino or La Niña is more than just looking at the ocean. It does also look at relationships with the atmosphere. If we go to the next slide. Here now, instead of looking at the sea surface, now this kind of reflects below the surface. We look at below the surface because that oftentimes leads what happens at the surface. Here now, a year ago is up at the top of this slide, and the bottom of this slide is the last week, so down in early November. Really the important thing to focus on here is that, you know, you get to about August of 2020 and we see a very stable type pattern with below average heat content or below average temperatures, really everywhere to the east of about 160 west, and we see above average temperatures in the western part of the Pacific. And at this point, we don't see any change to that pattern. You know, if you look higher up back like last winter, you can see how there might be warmth on the western part that then kind of traversed into the eastern part of the basin. Right now, things are very locked in. It will be months before we could even begin to see the end of this event, because the first thing we will see is that the orange colors and the above average temperatures in the western part of the basin will slide eastward. And at this point, there's really no sign of that happening at all. Next slide. So I mentioned that's now kind of looking at all the ocean. And again, if El Nino or La Niña only impacted the ocean, we probably wouldn't care very much about it here in the United States. But those changes in ocean temperatures result in changes in tropical rainfall. And this particular figure is again very characteristic of a La Niña. The areas that you see in orange are areas where we see less rainfall, less tropical rainfall than we typically would. Areas in blue are where we see enhanced or more tropical rainfall. And again, what this is showing is a shift in the overall patterns of convection westward, from the central and western part of the Pacific into the far western and really over Indonesia. It's this change in tropical rainfall that will, through various processes, impact the jet stream over the Pacific Ocean. I think Sandra had a little cartoon that shows the way that happens, and really this pattern is set up and seems to be well locked in. So, you know, we're fairly confident that at least the patterns that we typically see with La Niña will be featured, you know, at times and maybe for prolonged times this coming winter. Next slide. So the forecasts, and I kind of alluded to the fact that we don't see this La Niña ending anytime soon, and the next couple of slides will show various forecasts from various models. This is the model that the Weather Service runs. shows a continuation and maybe even a little bit of a strengthening of this event as we go into the winter, before some return towards normal during the spring and early parts of the summer. That's the figure on the left. Figure on the right literally shows, if we remember what the pattern looked like currently. It looks a lot like what we see in really all of these forecasts. There's really very, very little evolution, although as we do head into the spring, the intensity of the colors, so the departures kind of weaken. But really, this particular model would really persist, a fairly significant event through the winter at least. Next slide. And again, this shows a whole suite of different forecasts. Really, again, the takeaway message here is that La Nina is in place, and it's not going away anytime soon. So that we would certainly anticipate it to play a significant role in the upcoming winter forecasts and really the upcoming winter outcomes. If we go to the next slide, and then this is right. This I think Sandra also showed. This is just the official human forecast. I'm one of those forecasters. We'll see an update to this on Thursday, and we certainly won't see any significant changes. If anything, I'm sure as we get closer to the winter, we'll likely see, even more confidence that this event will be persisting for a number of seasons to come. Next slide. So this is really now the kind of the next step. So it's like why we care about that there's a La Nina in place. And that the simplest way to do that is to see historically what La Nina has meant for the US, or really you can do this anywhere you want, but we've done it obviously for what it means for the US in terms of winter temperature and precipitation. So going back to 1950, we've seen 22 La Ninas of different, certainly different strengths, slightly different flavors. But in a general sense, what they have in common is that if you look here now, looking at the left figure, if you just average all of those winters together, you get a pattern that shows that in a general sense, in the Southeast, temperatures have been above average. If you happen to be in North Dakota, there they have typically colder than average winters. And then the figure on the right shows the frequency. So that kind of gives us an idea as to how reliable that pattern that we look at on the left is. And really the most reliable part for this signal is in the Southeast, along the Gulf Coast, really, where we've seen a warmer than average winter better than 70% of the time. Now, it's important to realize it's not 100% of the time. Nothing you do in climate works 100% of the time. But 70% for a winter type of feature is pretty good. Interestingly, the southern parts of Florida, despite having a decent average departure, those areas actually happen a little less than 50% of the time. Now, departures in Florida during the winter usually aren't very large anyhow. But I did find it curious that a very strong signal in parts of Alabama and Louisiana is much weaker over Peninsula Florida. Next slide will give a similar type figure for precipitation. It's a little bit noisier, but looking again at the average of the 22 cases, you can see the browns across a good chunk of the Southeast, favoring below average precipitation. Strongest signals really right along the Gulf Coast and in Florida. Interesting in northern Georgia and parts of Alabama, you do see a slight wet signal, but again, if you look at the reliability or the frequency of that, you see the blues in those areas, implying that there have been a couple of very wet winters that kind of dominate the overall 22-year average. But again, the frequency is not as reliable, and certainly some of the earliest work when I started my career was looking at impacts of El Nino and La Nina, and the signal over Florida is quite strong. I think we're looking at better than 80% of those cases have been drier than average. So that kind of wraps up what we expect to see from La Nina. If we move on towards the next slide, we'll look at a few other tools that we look at before issuing our forecast. So one of the things that's very significant at times would be what the trends have been look like. We call it optimal climate normals. And at this point, it's basically looking at the last 15 years compared to our reference period. So when we issue a forecast and we favor above average temperatures, well, you might ask yourself, what above average compared to what? Currently that above average, or currently that period is 1981 to 2010. That gets updated every 10 years. And so next year, actually, if I'm sitting here or someone else is sitting here, our forecast will be relative to 1991 to 2020 period. But right now it's 1981 to 2010. And you can see in the Southeast in particular, those last 15 years have averaged to be pretty significantly warm. These are in terms of standard deviations. So in Florida, you're approaching 1 standard deviation above normal. So pretty significant, strong signal, at least with regards to temperature. If we go to the next slide, again, a similar plot for precipitation. Here, it's interesting. The signal is more mixed, with even a bit of a tilt towards wet in some parts of the Southeast. Not much of a signal in Florida at all. Here, some of these, what we've noticed is that the across, looking at the country as a whole, the most reliable signals appear to be across more in the northern part of the U.S. and maybe out in the Southwest and California. Hard to know what to make of the Southeast. In particular, again, you could be dealing with a couple of very wet years. This doesn't really say anything about the reliability of it. And given this hue that you'll see with precipitation, trends don't, in a general sense, aren't as significant in the Southeast. Next slide, I think, will be some of the models that we look at. In a general sense, this is what we call, and I keep forgetting to update this slide, it's no longer the National Multi-Model Ensemble, it's the North American Multi-Model Ensemble. Since back a few years ago, we added a couple of models from Canada into this. Really, in a general sense, the forecasts we see from these models almost always favor above average temperatures across really the whole CONUS and up into Canada. These particular forecasts do favor cold if you were up in Alaska or Western Canada. Again, that's a very well-known, reliable La Nina pattern. But here in the Southeast, all 3 versions of this, and here we're looking at a departure on the left. We're looking at a probabilistic forecast in the middle, and then a calibrated forecast, again, probabilistic forecast on the right, but they all do tilt towards above average temperatures. And if we go to the next slide, the precip forecast, again, in the Southeast is, different strengths or different confidence in below average precipitation this winter. But again, these models all strongly favor La Nina to continue. And when that happens, they generally give us a forecast that's quite consistent with historical La Nina. So next slide, I did want to take just a minute, since I'm not sure exactly of my audience, to talk about what CPC outlooks are and aren't. For the seasonal ones, we're looking at average temperature and accumulated precipitation. But they're done in terms of categories, and they're also done in terms of probabilities. And I like to get on my soapbox to make sure folks understand what a probability means. If you look at the forecast, and it's a 60% chance that it's going to be, a warmer than average winter. The astute person might say, well, there's also means there's a 40% chance it's not going to be above average, and that is the correct way to look at it. When you're dealing with a climate forecast, you'll rarely see probabilities, especially for temperature and precipitation on the longer leads, a probability exceeds 60 or maybe 70%. Sometimes in the shorter range, CPC does issue subseasonal outlooks that are as short as that 6 to 10 in week 2. And at times there we will use 80 or 90% confidence. You'll never see certainly 100% confidence on any of that. But so important to understand that we're forecasting a probability of being in one of 3 categories, below, near, or above. We're not forecasting extremes on these types of outlooks. Just in terms of a tercile. We do also have the option, if there's literally nothing that we can use to tilt the odds towards one of those categories, we will use EC, which basically means equal chances, or that the likelihood of any of those 3 categories is just a third, a third, a third. And then on the maps, and Sandra showed them, and I'll show the winter outlook in a minute, we're only showing one of those 3 probabilities. So we're showing the dominant category. We do have a few tools on our website that help we try to help the user understand that there are still some likelihood that temperatures will be in near average category or even the opposite side. So if we go to the next slide, we do these seasonal outlooks once a month. The one that I'll show in just another minute was issued October 15th. That's when we've taken to kind of announcing the winter outlook, although we will update these outlooks next Thursday. Again, they're issued on the 3rd Thursday of every month. We don't make large changes, as we get close to the season, but we do issue these seasons out a year into the future. So, right now you can go on the website and look to see what we're favoring for next summer. When we issue these outlooks next Thursday on November 19th, we'll actually take our first look at the winter of 21-22. Now, obviously, we're way out into the future. The ability to forecast phenomena like El Nino and La Niña are limited, and given that they play such a significant, or they can play such a significant role in the outlook, in a general sense, the longer lead outlooks really focus on more slowly evolving things such as trends. So next slide does show the temperature outlook. Again, for the Southeast, it looks a lot like what was just shown for November, December, January, with a tilt towards above average temperatures. Again, I don't have any little helpful hints in the Southeast. I guess maybe I could have, but where you see that 50% line cutting through Georgia and Alabama and southern South Carolina. So the mind should say, well, that's a 50% chance of above. It still leaves, that 1/3 chance of near average, and even, a 15 to 20% chance of below average temperature. Certainly not the favored outcome, but in climate, we don't always, get the favorite category. It's important to realize that every year is unique. Even with a La Nina or an El Nino, there are other less predictable factors that can really influence the winter season. Next slide is the precipitation outlook. Again, no surprise given what I've shown. Pretty confident forecast for below average precipitation, but again, there's certainly some possibility that it won't be below average if you were, a betting person, or if you were going to be planning for the upcoming winter. What we're showing on the map here is the way to go, but don't try not to be too surprised if things don't work. As this event continues to strengthen as it has been, we might become even more confident in this forecast and raise the probabilities. Again, that will be in the final update next Thursday. And I think my last slide is a repeat of the drought outlook that you folks have seen. Southeast has been in pretty good shape, certainly a lot better than the western half of the country, but there are some areas that we're looking at for the potential for development. And I guess this is the one product that's a little bit offset. It only does run through January. Next Thursday, when we update for the December, January, and February, the drought outlook will also go through February. And given the forecasts, I guess we'll see what the current conditions are like. But it's possible we could see expectations for some additional areas of drought development. But that process will be determined next week. And I think that's my last slide. So let me turn it back to whoever's in charge.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike, for taking the time to walk us through the different information and models and tools that are used to develop the winter outlook. I think that was incredibly helpful. My name is Meredith Muth. I work at the National Integrated Drought Information System. I am one of the co-sponsors of this webinar series, along with the Southeast Regional Climate Center and NOAA National Weather Service. Once again, thank you to our speakers. Every month we have Sandra Rain and Pam Knox, and our special guest today, Mike Halpert. If you have questions or comments, please put them into the question box. And we, in addition to our speakers, we also have a few people on the sides, experts in the field of climate in the Southeast, that are available to answer any of your questions related to information you saw today or other questions you may have regarding climate issues in the Southeast. Our next webinar will be December 8th at 10 a.m. A summary, a recap email of today's presentation, along with a link of the webinar recording, will be sent out by tomorrow. Here's a link to register for upcoming webinars. A short survey will pop up on your screen as soon as you close this webinar. Feel free to help us answer some questions and help us improve, especially regarding future topics, as you saw today, regarding the winter outlook that you would like a little bit more information on. And any questions, of course, feel free to contact me anytime. So now we'll move over to our question and answer period. Mike, I just want to check, can you see the questions in your box? I will read them out. I just wanted to see if you can see them, because I imagine.
No, I actually can't. The only thing I have access to is the chat window. I don't see the question window show up.
Well, I will read these out and give in advance. These are currently related to models and outlooks. The first one is for you, Mike. Which model seems to be more accurate, North American or European? I've heard that one.
When we're looking at seasonal timescales, the reality is they're not very different at all. I know in the shorter term, the European gets a lot of I guess praise at times. The U.S. models are constantly going upgrades, but really we don't pay more attention to any one model. In a general sense, we just kind of look at all of them. But when we're dealing with like a La Nina like this, there's really not significant differences among the model forecasts.
Great, thank you, Mike. The next question is interesting. It's looking at the linkage between seasonal forecast and public health. So I'll read this out. And again, any of our panelists are welcome to answer. Are seasonal forecasts shared with public health officials to help forecast potential COVID-19 outbreaks and showing where there are better opportunities for outdoor gatherings versus staying indoors? More time outdoors could slow the spread of the virus. I'd also like to remind this group that we had a couple of presentations earlier this year, especially on information products related to heat stress and exposure. So would any of our panelists like to take a stab at this? Mike, does CPC share this information with public health officials?
We do at some very high overview levels, but I think that probably the shorter range outlooks would probably be more beneficial. I mean, the seasonal one, even though we're favoring across the Southeast, say above normal temperature and below normal precipitation, it really doesn't say anything about any specific days during that. I mean, we're looking at a 90-day average. So the shorter range outlooks could potentially play a role. I'm not involved in any of that specific outreach, but I know that we do have some folks dealing with FEMA and other organizations, and so this information does get conveyed to those folks.
Thanks, Mike. Do any of the other panelists would like to respond?
This is Pam. I mean, I'm sure that the health authorities are very aware of these and watch them. In fact, there probably are some listening on this webinar today, but I don't get very many questions from them specifically when being asked about climate and climate impacts. There's certainly several groups that are working on the relationship between climate and health, and so I'm sure they're also very interested.
Thank you, Pam. I don't see any more questions. I'll leave it open for another minute. Oh, we have one more. This question may be mostly for Pam. I'm mainly wanting to know about crop susceptibility to freezes going forward. We've only had a light freeze so far in northern Alabama, and it looks like any hard freeze will be later than the average date.
Yeah, I looked at that this morning before the webinar. Most of the region has not had any significant frost except for the mountains. Mountains, of course, being higher in elevation and a little bit on the north side, have mostly ended their growing season, but most of the rest of the region has only seen some very light frosts and really no freezes at all. And I looked ahead for the next couple weeks and the models really don't show anything. So really this year we're definitely going to see a late end of the growing season. Not surprising considering how warm it's been, especially with this trough in the west coast and the ridge in the east coast that's been bringing a lot of warm air to the region. And so you know, sooner or later we're going to get frost, but so far I don't see any on the near horizon.
Thank you, Pam. We've had a question to bring back the tracks of the named storms from the season. So I am the named storms. Is it? Oh, the tracks. Okay, there we go. And there you go. So this was just a request to put this back up on the screen. Okay, last call for any questions. We've got some great experts on the line.
Yeah, this is David Zierden in Florida. Something that kind of ties a lot of this together is the really unusual amount of rainfall in South Florida in the months of October and so far in November. That should climatologically be the start of Florida's dry season. And with the strong La Niña forecast, we should anticipate dry conditions beginning even previously to today. But due to this lingering tropical season, we continue to get much above normal rainfall. Tropical storm Ada brought over 16 inches to some areas of Broward County over the past few days. So kind of a big impact to that is Lake Okeechobee is much higher than the Army Corps of Engineers like to keep it. And with the La Nina forecast, they would normally even think of holding water back at this point, but they cannot, and they're releasing Lake Okeechobee water into the Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie estuaries, which plays environmental havoc, and it's very unseasonal for these kind of releases, but they're necessary due to this ongoing tropical season and the amount of rainfall they've had over the past month and a half in South Florida. So we're anxiously looking forward to the La Nina pattern actually kicking in.
Thank you, David. I did not know that. That's interesting. Okay, well, with that, I'd like to. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Meredith. This is Victor Murphy from Fort Worth, National Weather Service climate. Getting back to the Huntsville question real quick, or the Northern Alabama question about the freeze. I went back and looked at the observed data so far this cold season for the Huntsville, Alabama site, and they hit 33 degrees on November 2nd, 34 degrees on November 3rd. So some areas in that, some pockets, some areas in there may well have had their first freeze of the year. But if you have not had your first freeze, I want to second what Pam said. It looks like, looking ahead for the next 7 days or so, looks like the coldest temperatures should be perhaps near 40 or so next Tuesday, a week away. And week 2 is looking as though it's a strong, pretty strong tilt for above normal temperatures, which takes us almost to Thanksgiving. So I would concur with what Pam said about the first freeze there. You know, if you haven't had one yet, the first freeze there in northern Alabama definitely being delayed.
Thanks, Victor. David, we have one more question regarding South Florida. Would the releases that you spoke of portend increased red tides this winter?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part of the question.
I want to know if the releases of water you mentioned from Lake Okeechobee, would it lead to an increased red tide this winter?
Oh, probably not. Research has shown that these releases are much more closely tied to the blue-green algae outbreaks rather than red tide. Red tide actually tends to start further offshore where it's less impacted by runoff. And also, wintertime when ocean temperatures are lower is not the climatological time that red tide really affects us. But with both red tide and blue-green algae, hopefully it won't be too much of an issue. And also, again, hopefully the prevailing La Niña patterns will kick in along with our typical dry season and take care of the problem.
Thank
Hey,
you.
David, getting back, this is Victor, getting back to Florida for a second. There is a Weather Service co-op observation site in Fort Lauderdale that as of this morning has now registered 99.09 inches of rainfall so far this year. It's the wettest on record for that site, actually even surpassing 1947, which for much of South Florida was the wettest year on record. So parts of South Florida, you know, specifically probably Broward County, maybe Palm Beach County, and Dade County may actually see upwards of, upwards of 90 inches of rainfall this year, and maybe even a few sites above 100. So the expected La Nina conditions, the enhanced tilt for dryness, as well as the usual Florida dry season cannot come fast enough for a lot of people.
We have one last question regarding to verify that Clayton, North Carolina had its warmest October on record. That is true. That has been confirmed. And James, you asked if that is a co-op site. I will connect you with offline. We can connect you with Sandra and she could provide additional information. Okay, and with that, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to having you join us again December. Stay well. And again, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer regarding climate in Southeast offline. Have a lovely day.